All right, everybody. Hello. Hope you're all doing really well. This is going to be prompted by a news item, kind of a blast from my past that came across my feed. This is going to be something that is kind of personal to my circumstances growing up, but also very generally applicable. Something that I think pretty much everybody has to deal with at some point or another, and I think it illustrates a lot of very important points. And one of the things about being a libertarian, and even if you're a very mild one, you kind of end up finding that a large portion, maybe a vast majority of government spending is misallocated, is wrong. Maybe it's because what they're spending the money on is itself an evil thing, or maybe it's because it's being spent on something that nominally might have a market value, but is just being handled in a way because of the divorce of market and incentives in a tax-funded institution, just maybe vastly inferior and costly relative to what is possible. And if you're like me, that's pretty much true of everything the government does. If you're a little bit more moderate, there may be some exceptions here. There are some people who will advance arguments along the lines of public goods, which again, a public good is not something that a lot of people use. It's a good that's not excludable. So something like a missile shield or a force field shield protecting the country, or hypothetically, potentially an army, although I think that actually isn't true, but that could be the argument anyway. It's certainly not the case that healthcare is a public good, or that roads are a public good, or that ports or lighthouses or any number of other things are actually public goods. And one of the things that is often called a public good, but is most certainly not, is education. Education can completely be privatized, and privatized education is demonstrably superior. The results are better in terms of any metric that you want to measure, if it's at least an academic metric. If you're talking about test scores or outcomes, it's far superior to be educated privately or homeschooled or even not educated. And it's also far more cost effective. And I'd also argue that the idea that it conveys general benefits, that's an argument that could be used for anything. If I eat food, I'm healthier, and therefore that's good for everyone, right? I have the energy to contribute to society, therefore it's a general good, right? You could just say that for pretty much anything. But there's something about schools in particular. There's a couple things, a couple large areas of the government that they kind of are uniquely bad in their own ways. So I think it would be wrong to say schools are absolutely the worst. Maybe they're fundamentally some of the most important, but I think there's a very strong argument that things like the military and war are worse, that the police are worse, that things like the drug war maybe are worse. But there's something particularly insipid about schools, because usually the guns are not out there. People don't see the gun in the room as easily as they do with, say, the military or with the police. And they also have an enormous amount of mythology and nostalgia wrapped around them. Now, this is true with a lot of things. There's a lot of mythology surrounding things like the Food and Drug Administration and corporate regulations in general. People have a completely fanciful idea of where that came from, but that idea is almost always something they learn at school. It's not visceral. It's not something that they take like a personal stock in. However, with education, that is the case. Unless you didn't go to public schools, and there's a decent number of people who didn't, especially people whose parents worked in government and were highly powerful. A lot of those people never went to public schools, but most of us did. And, you grow up there, you have your friends there, and so then you kind of tie it all together. Maybe you had one or two good teachers, maybe you had one or two good experiences, maybe you really enjoyed on a certain sports team, or maybe you were in the band, or maybe you were in choir or drama, or you just had a hell of a good time. And so then people tie up their personal nostalgia with the institution as a whole, something that you could very easily do with anything, right? There's people who have nostalgia for the military. There's people who have nostalgia for national parks. There's even people who have nostalgia for prison. I mean, all you have to do is watch something like Shawshank Redemption and realize there are people who become, quote, institutionalized and end up preferring being in prison to being in the real life. And that isn't something that carte blanche would just justify everything. But this is going to be a little personal anecdote. So I put a link in the description there. There's a bit of a paywall, but you get the basic gist of it by looking at it. This is from a local paper in the hometown that I grew up in, and it says, with new stadium, Big Rapids will soar into new area of athletics. Right now, the mascot at this high school, the high school that I went to, is a cardinal, so maybe the soar reference is supposed to. I mean, we usually don't consider cardinals soaring. That's more like if the mascot had been an eagle or a hawk, but I guess those mascots were all taken, so they settled for cardinals, which I think are pretty popular. There's a lot of cardinal mascots out there. So reading this story, they just built a stadium, and brand new football stadium, soccer stadium, track stadium at my local high school. And this is in October of 2021. They have had their very first games there. Sounds pretty ordinary, but then you learn that they started building that stadium when I was a sophomore in high school in the year 2000, 21 years ago. That's right. I was in high school. I was not even an upperclassman yet, and they started building this stadium in the year 2000. I remember it very clearly. The school, there was a series of bond issues, and I think this is important to go through the history here to kind of illustrate the narrative here and then to break it down. So my little town, which at the time had a population of 10 to 12,000 people, a prosperous little town, more or less, in northern Michigan, quintessential college town, very much modeled on New England because of the college. Classic kind of Midwest where most of the institutions are set up by Yankees, but a lot of the people are either from Appalachia or from the Midlands, a lot of Germans, a lot of Scandinavians, a lot of Dutch. And this town, for many, many years, had a middle school that was built in 1920 and a high school that was built in 1964. And that had been the status quo for at least 35 years by the time I got there. And these buildings were old, right? There were costs associated with them. They were, in some instances, I wouldn't say crowded, but near full. But they had found ways to accommodate this. So the middle school in particular had built what they called portables, basically trailer houses that were single classrooms, and I believe there were 2 or 3 of them. But that was pretty much it. People weren't having classes in hallways or double classes or anything like that. But I guess you could say it was crowded in the sense that there could have been more space or fewer students. And for many years, there had been a movement to build a new high school. And even though the biggest employer in town is the public schools, and the biggest employer in town is the university, and we can imagine how most people in universities would vote yes, and the second biggest employer is in fact the public schools. You'd think that this wouldn't be that hard to pass, but it's relatively a Republican area. And a lot of people did not want to pay for a new school because they weren't clear that it was necessary. And people really, really beat the drum for years. The bond issue had been failed several times. But finally, by promising something to everyone, it was passed in the year 2000. Let's see, did I post the right thing? Yeah, new stadium should be the right thing. So let me make sure. Yeah, there we go. Oh yeah, ignore that first link. That first link actually has pictures of the stadium, so that's probably fine. The way they got it passed was to promise something to everybody. So if you said that you had kids in swimming or you liked swimming, they would say, oh, well, we'll use the bond issue to build a pool. If you liked sports, maybe a football fan, maybe your kids were in football or they had been in football or you played football or you knew someone who liked it, well, we'll build you a new stadium. If you were into band or choir, well, we'll build a nice, huge auditorium that will be state of the art and blah, blah, blah. And if you, whatever it is you liked, and thank you, Jim Jesus, I see that, but no, Jim Jesus, that's not Jim Jesus who tipped. So I don't know who you are, but thanks to Jim Jesus out there. But the they basically promised whatever they could, and eventually the bond issue passed very narrowly. And of course, all the teachers were able to take the day off school to go vote. And I think it won by like 100 votes or 150 votes, something relatively small. And that was in 1995. And in 1996, they started construction. And here's where it gets a little personal for me. At that time, the bond issue passed when I was in fifth grade. Construction started in May of 1996, which is the end of my sixth grade year. At the beginning of my sixth grade year, we were told, everyone in the middle school, so probably 500 kids, about 550, something like that, 500 kids between the three grades. We were all told we had to write essays about why it was good that there was a new high school. Now, granted and noted, there was not an essay contest to see pros and cons. Is it good? Is it not good? What are the benefits? It was assumed, as an assumption, taken for granted, a starting point, that it was a good thing. And we had to write essays as to why it was a good thing. But, I had grown up in a family that was pretty pro public schools and pro public education, and I had seen enough to kind of absorb what the rhetoric was. So my story won. I got selected. They picked one person from every class. So I was the class. They started calling us by the class of the year that we're going to graduate, which is something that was pretty common now, but it wasn't common back then. So one person from the class of 2000, 2001, in my class, 2002, even though at this point it's 1996 and years away from graduating. So, I read in the paper, I remember saying, I see people who are sitting in hallways, which, yeah, it was true. Like the art students would sit in the hallway to draw a perspective of the hallway for their perspective drawing, right? But we can twist that to say that they had to have class in the hallway or whatnot. And, it's crowded and education's important, and therefore spending money on facilities is important. And so this bond issue should pass, and it did. And so in the spring of that year, there was a groundbreaking ceremony and this big vacant lot that the school had purchased with the bond issue, and it was over a square mile of land on the outside of town, so it wasn't really developed. There was some farmland, a couple of houses that they bought, a lot of wetland actually, and there's this big ceremony. They played Appalachian Spring and dancing and speeches, and they brought people in who had graduated in the 20s. I think somebody from the class of 22 and someone else from the class of 29. And then everybody from the class of 96 all the way until the youngest people who could make it, right? So they had people, I think they had people who were set to graduate probably 18 years after that. They were babies. Like they're probably the children of the school board members or whatnot. So we were all given golden shovels. I'm sure they weren't gold. They must have been brass, but they looked gold. And we each did one scoop. High honor of my life. I've still got the t-shirt, rah, rah, go Cardinals. So one of the other ways that they sold it, though, was by telling everyone that buildings like this are only built every several decades. One had been built in 1920, one had been built in 1964, and then this one is being built basically in 1998. So they're like, well, it'll be 30 more years before we build another one, probably longer. There won't be any need for another building. So you can go ahead and vote for this, and that'll be the last time you ever have to pass a bond issue for the education in this town. So I believe it was a $26 million bond issue. And if you look, there was a lot. I mean, impressive is a relative term here. Okay, so it's not impressive like to the Coliseum or to a state capitol or a skyscraper or anything like that. But for the town, and for what it was, it did seem impressive. The hallways are all 15 to 20 feet high. The cafeteria hallways are something like 50 feet high. The main hallways are very long corridors that I probably run maybe 200 meters or more even. I'm not exactly sure. And the central hub, it's basically like a central hub with spokes, each spoke representing a couple hallways. Central hub with a big, what they call a rotunda, but like a 30-foot ceiling circular structure, which cost $1.5 million and serves exactly zero educational purpose at all. But it all looked cool. And I remember even attending this school. It looked cool. It certainly looked nice. They never got around to building the pool. They did not build a big auditorium, which they had told a lot of people they would, but they did build a nice small auditorium that I think only sat maybe 160 people. But it looked really nice and it sounded pretty good. And they did not build a stadium. They built several fields, or practice fields, several. There was enough land that they were able to make, I think, 2 practice football fields and maybe 2 or 3 soccer fields, 2 or 3 baseball fields, some tennis courts, but no stadium, no place you could actually have games, at least officially. The other thing is the school had a football field. They had owned one in an adjacent property to the original middle school, right? So what had been the high school became the middle school. So this building built in 1964, it was converted to a middle school. It still is to this day. And the building built in 1920, which had been the middle school for many, many years, probably 50 years or more, that was sold to a charter school. A charter school started up, and this charter school took several hundred students away from the public school, obviously, mostly. Some of those charter school kids came from outside of town. Many of them came from within town. But there was an adjacent property, separated by a road, so not the same property, that had a track, bleachers, and a football stadium. And in its infinite wisdom, the school board sold this property. But this, of course, then meant that there was no football stadium or soccer stadium or track area that the school could own, which wasn't, it seems kind of dumb to sell it because there was no way that they were going to be able to take the $250,000 and buy another stadium or build another stadium. So what they ended up using was the local college. Local college said, hey, we've got a football stadium. It's not the big house or anything like that, but for a rural high school, it's more than enough. And that stadium they don't use on Friday nights. So they said, the high school can use it. I don't know what the arrangement was, if they were paying rent, if they were sharing concessions. I think that they were given generous terms, but I don't know. And so that is where they were going to have games. So then my sophomore year, one day, out of the blue, in the adjacent fallow fields where they had purchased all this property that had been farmland at one point, and now it's been fallow for several years, probably 4 or 5. One day a bunch of bulldozers show up and they grade the area, they plow it up, they take out all the stumps and rocks, cut down all the trees, and create this level area. They build a berm, they build a track, they put up these stadium lights, these really high, tall lights. They put bulbs in the lights. They turn them all on. And for about a week, these bright, bright stadium lights are on in this field next to the building. This is in the year 2000, by the way. And then they stop. And they stop. They turn the lights off. And they never have a game there. Never have a track meet. Never have a soccer match. Never have a practice. It remains completely vacant and unused until this fall, like literally a week ago, 21 years later. So the kids who are playing there, even the oldest ones, even the seniors who were held back 1 year and are now 19, were born after they started building it. It's like the Afghanistan war of fucking public schools. It's actually a year older than the Afghanistan war, believe it or not. Just to give that into perspective, if you're old enough to remember that, this is a year before 9/11 that this started to be built. So it's finally there. And if you read the article about it, he makes no mention of its cost. I don't know how much more. So they passed another bond issue. They tried to pass another bond issue a mere 4 years or 5 years after this. So when I was in college, I believe in 2004. So at this point, it was about 9 years after the first bond issue, which again was sold on the belief that there'll never be another bond issue in your lifetime because, once we have a new high school, what more could we possibly need? But no, that wasn't the case. And when I was in college, I started getting emails from the school board beseeching me to change my voting address to Big Rapids, again, my hometown, and to vote for a bond issue that was, I'm sure they marketed it out, the name Complete the Dream. So apparently all that $26 million that they spent on a new building, making sure to spend $1.5 million on a rotunda that serves absolutely no purpose, and super high ceilings and vertical lines. And I've learned this talking to architects. Architects who design these things are not kind of motivated by any kind of pedagogy, right? They don't look at it and be like, we've done studies on, we've done research on what kind of facilities do the best in terms to encourage educational results. They look at it like, what looks good aesthetically on the page? What can I show people and make a model? And they'll be like, ooh, ah. And so that's what they build. And so it's got fine lines on the outside and on the inside. But the connection of those lines and those architectural, subjective, I don't know what the word would be, like, just their aesthetics have no impact, no relationship with education at all, none, right? And they're expensive, right? Again, rotunda was $1.5 million, and if we were talking about the other extraneous things there, I don't know, but it'd be a lot more. So Complete the Dream was going to be another, I think, half as much money, $13 million, but no new schools. They're just going to replace some boilers and presumably, finally build that stadium. That was failed. That bond issue did not pass. And by now, another issue is creeping in. The population of this town is going down. Okay, so the population when I was there was 11 to 12,000. It's now under 8,000. So it's a significant drop. So there's fewer students. On top of that, there is a flourishing charter school, which also is taking hundreds of students away from the student body. And hundreds at that student body is a significant portion. So everything is smaller. The band is smaller. The sports teams are smaller. There's fewer kids. Everything is way smaller, and yet they need more money. So maybe 2 years ago, I was visiting family, and I went to a movie theater. There were two very small movie theaters, and just kind of parallel to this, both of those movie theaters are now closed and are not likely ever to open because it's a shrinking market, and a small one at that. But while I was there, I had the chance to meet an old acquaintance, somebody who worked at the university, who I had interacted with quite a bit, and he was there with his 17-year-old son, which we calculated that the last time I had seen him and met him was when the son was less than 1 year old, so that was kind of interesting. And the son was a junior in high school at the time, and they had just passed another bond issue finally. And with this bond issue, they were going to complete the stadium, which that was 2 years ago, so they finally completed it 2 years after that, and build a second gym. Right now that there's fewer students, and questionable to what degree any gym did anything for anyone, there's now a second gym, which cost millions and millions and millions of dollars in a shrinking town, right? And even these people, this is a university professor, so he's not a libertarian when it comes to education, and his son, who was currently like, hi, I got Bitcoin Cash address I can send a tip to. I don't think I can help you that with Nosman. I'll try and set that up in the future, though. Yeah, if you guys want to donate crypto to me, let me know if that's a thing you'd be into, and I'll try and set something up. Wait, do I have? Hold up. Let me see. Maybe I got something. Don't really have anything, I don't think. No. Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm just going to have to forego whatever you were going to give me for now. But I appreciate that, Norseman. Thank you very much for the thought anyway. I'll try and get something figured out for that. So even these people, right? A kid who goes to the school and his higher education dad could not think of a good reason why there needed to be a second gym. The school had gotten by without one, and the population of the school was going down. The other gym that they had was, the one that was built in 1998, so relatively new, should have been in relatively good shape, and it was a little bit of a juggle because you have all the different teams that have to use it. You got a boys team and a girls team, at least for now, and they kind of had to juggle it between them. So obviously it'd be simpler if pretty quick. Okay, you know what? Let me get a fucking. All right. Stay on the line. Let's see what I can do. I'll get something really simple. I don't have anything on my phone for that though. Oh wait. Maybe I do. Let me get my Konami amount on wallet going in a minute, and then we can do it then. So, there we go. So this is going to be ghetto. I'm going to see if this works. I'm just going to hold it up to the camera. You said Bitcoin Cash? You ready, Nosman? Nosman, let me know when you're ready. Message when you're ready, and I'll hold up the QR code to the camera. Okay. We're going to do it that way. So this will be more of a novelty unless you give me a huge amount. But either way, I appreciate it. So there's really no... Even these liberals, even these people who are big believers in public education couldn't explain why. So they finally build a stadium. Hooray, hurrah. Big Rapids Athletics soars to new heights now, which is a very flowery way to say no measurable impact at all, either on athletics or on the school. And I'm not one to denigrate athletics too much. I wasn't involved in them. I think there's a lot about athletics that is toxic. It breeds a lot of tribalism. Certain sports tend to give people brain damage. It can foster some of the worst things in people. But it also can develop your physical body. Nosman, you got to screenshot it and then send it. That's what you're going to have to do. Don't worry, Herb. This wallet is empty. There's nothing in it. So there's nothing he'll be able to do. I'm not going to show a wallet that I actually use on here. It's going to be like my spare wallet that is empty. And will remain empty until Nosman figures it out. Here, Nosman. Bitcoin Cash, you said, right? There you go. Bitcoin Cash. There we go. Hack away, that's empty. So there's nothing in that. There's absolutely no connection between the spending and any kind of result. Test scores at the school never went up because of the new school. Athletic performance at the school never showed any measurable increase, and to what extent that would be worth it. I mean, let's say that the new high school made it so that the teams won more games. Instead of winning as many as they won more. And maybe sometimes that even translated into a championship here and there. There have been a couple championships at that school for things like cross country, maybe golf, and a few others. I don't know to what extent that can be attributed to the new building. I think it's rather unlikely. So, for instance, the cross country team, they don't even use the school facilities hardly. The teacher who is their coach has been there for like 30 years, since way before. So it's probably more to do with him than the building, but, who knows? Maybe we'll give it some credit. But even if you did, so what? That's great for those kids. They ran faster relative to the other kids in high school who they competed against. Bravo. Good for them. I don't want to minimize that, but it's interesting what kind of dollar level can you put on that? And also, can we really attribute that to anything, right? To anything that the school has done. And this is one of the dirty little secrets of education. If you've got a populace that's, values education, that values, has a Puritan work ethic, that values hard work, that values self-improvement, then that's going to foster a population where a certain number of the people are going to end up doing well in whatever they choose to pursue, whether that's tennis or running or music or sports or whatever it is. And a society like that may be likely to have a subsidized education system like my little town did, but who's to say that it wasn't the culture and the background that made it all happen, right? When somebody did well, when I did well, like, so I won some geography bees growing up. I did really well in a competition called Quiz Bowl. It wasn't just me. There were a couple other people on the Quiz Bowl team who also contributed an awful lot. But we didn't learn what we knew that made us win those competitions because of the school. We learned it because our parents would buy us books or give us lessons or pay to have us have tutors or wherever the case may be, or just foster a love of learning, a love of knowledge, which is something that, my parents definitely did. So how much credit does the school get for that? And I think the only honest answer is like probably none or very little, or at the very best, you can't say. It's hard to know. So on the other hand, the cost of these facilities is astronomical. It's huge for a small town like this. The bond issue for the original school has not been paid off even yet, even after these 20 years, right? Everyone who lives in that city is paying, I believe the average was something like $1,200 a year in extra property taxes to fund the first bond issue. The second bond issue would add some fraction to that, maybe 25% more. So there you go. And that's what we have is there's no, the logical limit to how much you can spend, there isn't any, right? Why not have a pool? Why not have two stadiums? Why does the stadium only seat 800 people when it could seat 10,000 people or 100,000 people? And why don't we have a NASCAR ring? And why doesn't the equestrian team have a polo field? And why don't we have a water polo field? Oh, and wouldn't it be great if we had a swimming pool? We don't have a swimming pool. Where does our swim team practice? We don't have a swim team. What kind of education do we have if we don't have a swim team? And how can we have the swim team just practice at the college pool or at the community pool? That's not going to bring students in. No one's going to move to the town just to be on the swim team if the swim team doesn't even have its own pool. So we should have our own pool to bring in what? 5 people, 5 swimmers? And what does that even mean? That on the one day of the year where they count the kids to apportion the state budget for that they'll have 5 more heads, that they'll get $3,000 a piece. So that's $15,000, but the pool is going to cost $2 million. So what are you going to have to do that every year for 55 years? Only you don't even have a swim team for 2 years because there's not enough kids to play, and it costs too much upkeep, and you have to have 3 more janitors to take care of the whole place, and the chemical bills outweigh the cost of the extra students times 5, and it's just complete madness. Right. And the football team in particular, like, they're just giving them brain damage, like that's the extent of the educational contribution for them. So yeah, they're contributing to long-term mental problems as a result. So it sounds really nice if you just ignore the costs and you just assume that there is some kind of connection between the spending and the facilities and educational results, then fine. But the educational results aren't there. The school's getting smaller, although the staff isn't shrinking accordingly. I don't know if there have been any staff cutbacks, but if they have, I'm sure they're not proportional with the number of students who are no longer there. But the test scores aren't going up, and test scores themselves have only a nominal, like I recommend people measuring up, which is by a Harvard education, professor. It's his thing. They don't measure anything. They don't really comport with success. They don't show or predict how well people are going to do in the long run. And it's sad. So we spent $26 million in a small town so that we can get the SAT score up by a little bit, only it didn't even go up, so it didn't even achieve that. And if it had, there's a 50% chance that it could go up, right? Where's the evidence that it's because of the building? Where's the evidence it's because when we went to class, which we did in about half the classrooms in there, instead of sitting at a regular desk, we sat at these very sturdy, very expensive looking slate laboratory desks, right? They were made out of slate, so they would be neutral if chemicals will spill on them, right? So these must have been like 50-pound tables that were sturdy enough that they could have load bared. You probably could have put 500 pounds on them without breaking them. Well, that's a fucking nice table. They had a couple hundred of them in the school. I wonder how much they cost per unit, but hey, I just was filling out fucking, multiple choice tests on them. We weren't using them for anything like that. And they weren't, the one time they were used chemicals on them, They used them 500 times for just mundane things. But hey, they looked really nice, and I'm sure the contractor made a lot of money. And as someone said, somebody made a lot of money. And somebody made a big fucking mistake. So what I found out just a couple days ago was the reason that they started building the stadium but didn't finish it is because it wasn't budgeted when they passed the bond issue. They didn't budget that in, but when they finished the school, they thought they had enough left to maybe do a stadium. So they started to build a stadium, and then they ran out, and then they didn't get any more until they passed another bond issue, which wasn't for 20 years. So all the money that they spent on this stadium initially, which I'm sure it was way more than $250,000 that they got when they sold their old stadium, right? The one that they already owned and just sold for no apparent reason other than we should have a new one instead of an old one, which is also interesting too, because half the time schools are predicated on their nostalgia and the community and it's always been here and blah, blah, blah. No, we're going to sell the one that has all that. It's good enough. I mean, we're actually going to lose population. And I'll get to that in a second. But all the money that they spent back then was wasted. Nobody who was going to school then was able to take advantage of it. Nobody who was alive then was able to take advantage of it. It was people who were born 2, 3, 5, 10 years later who are going to get to use it. And it's okay, so they get to use it. You could say, well, future generations, yeah, but what value is it to them? I mean, they're going to have fun going there, but like, how much is that worth? How much is their fun? How much is their education enhanced? Because instead of playing a football game at the local college or at the old stadium that the school owned and then sold, they had it at the new stadium. The difference at the new stadium is so great that it's worth the millions of dollars that they spent, the hundreds of thousands that they wasted way back in the year 2000 before the Afghanistan war even started. No. It's complete travesty. It's a complete farce. Like a complete waste of everyone's money and everyone's time. And yeah, it's complete. And yeah, and that's another point. And big dumb fat cat. We are not going to draw the exact same conclusions here, but the big secret is that it doesn't matter how much you spend on the school. At all. There's a complete detethering between test results and outcomes in schools. And even when there's a link, the link is correlation, not causation. And there's every reason to think that there are third and fourth factors that are what's making the difference there. And those third and fourth factors are cultural. If you want to be a race realist, they're genetic, and I'm sure they are genetic to some point, to some degree. But they're definitely cultural, and they're definitely genetic, and they have not a hell of a lot to do with how nice the lines are in the high school. And on that point, they built the high school larger than it needed to be because they were assuming there would be growth. I sent $1 of Bitcoin Cash as a subscriber for about 10 years. I suppose you have earned it. Thanks, Nosman. I feel no one is obligated to pay me. Obviously, I put this stuff out for free. If I make money on the side, that's wonderful. I have, as of yet, made almost nothing on this site. Not quite, but almost. But I do take it. I appreciate when people want to help. And I've had people over the years like buy me books, buy me dinner. The best, definitely the most expensive is when I went to Oklahoma City, and a couple took me out to dinner and bought me the best steak I've ever had. And I believe it was like $150. It was amazing. If they're watching this, thank you guys. That was awesome. I'll never forget. It was a very interesting thing. Yeah. So they built the school bigger than it needed to be on the assumption that the population would go up, right? So they had incorporated in that maybe they could fit in hundreds of more students, 20, 30%. And the population has gone down. And so as the trends are right now, it's probably going to continue to go down. Maybe they'll get a little bump because of COVID, because this is one of the places that people will move during COVID to get away from the big cities, but I don't know if it will be enough. I mean, why would you move there? You're not going to move there because there's a new football stadium, I'm sure. You might move there if there were low taxes, but maybe there aren't because there's so many bond issues there. I paid higher taxes there as a kid working at a fast food restaurant than I pay now as an adult working in Manchester, New Hampshire. So part of that's the state and part of that's the city. I don't pay any fucking city taxes, by the way, like none. And there were there were noticeable city taxes there, even if you didn't live in the city, which I didn't. You had to pay a city income tax in that town, and if I think it was 2% in my bracket. If you lived there, it was 1%. If you didn't live there but worked there, and if you lived there, your property taxes were paying an awful lot. But the population has gone down. And even if the trend reverses, it's been 20 years, it's been going down for the last 2 censuses. So for the last 20 years. So if things reverse and they increase at the rate or less than the rate that they declined, that will mean in 20 more years, the population will be the same as it was when they built the school. So that will, by that point, be 40 years after the school will be built, it will have the same population, which the school will be too big for that. If it continues, maybe it will reach the plan for overcapacity in 10 or 20 years after that, in which case we're talking 50 or 60 years after it was built. And that is not clairvoyance, that's not omniscience, that's not good planning. That would just be dumb luck, and not really, because it's 60 years later. How much extra do they pay in maintenance costs for extra facilities every single year for at least 40, probably 50 or 60, or forever? Because that's assuming the population starts to go back up again, which it may never do. Or if it does, it may not do it fast enough. Or even if it does, the fact that there's a charter school and lots of homeschooling, because that's a thing too, and that's becoming more popular, that's going to cut into their leads. It's kind of like these additions are not going to go all to the high school. They're going to be split. And so even if there is an increase, which there's not, and there hasn't been, and there's been a 2-decade trend in the opposite direction, it's just going to shrink and shrink and shrink. And the city is burdened with the maintenance costs of all this, which only get higher and higher every single year, right? As the facilities age, as they deteriorate more and more and more, the amount that must be put into maintaining them is more, which is why the Complete the Dream bond issue, which was half again as much as the original, 13 million to the 26 million, didn't build a single new building, right? It was all about new boilers, reconfiguring, and they've done some other weird things. They closed, there were 4 elementary schools, they closed one of them, but they didn't really close, like they emptied it of students, but they maintain that facility as an empty building now for more than 10 years. This reminds me of what the Soviets would call, if they had factories they couldn't run because there were no people with the skills to run them because they had either been executed or wisely fled. They would keep them in, quote, technical, what was the term? Technical preservation. They would basically just mothball them. And so they're doing that to one of the elementary schools. They have been doing that for 15 years now, I think. And that costs $250,000 every single year just to keep a building there that they're not using. For what? The future? In case? Just in case? Thomas Sowell is literally only relevant because he's black. Nothing about him would be remarkable. Thomas Sowell's writings are remarkable completely in and of their own right. You do not have to know that he's black to find his stuff amazing, and it is. I've read more Thomas Sowell books than anybody else who writes about politics or economics. And it's not because, well, he's my token black dude. I don't fucking care that he's black, right? He's an obvious outlier for anybody, for any group. His IQ, his output, the quality that he does is an outlier for any group, whether it's he's an outlier for Jews, he'd be an outlier for East Asians, he's an outlier for white, and yeah, he's a big outlier for black. Yeah, the idea that all black people everywhere have the same culture is dumb. American black culture is very different from African black culture. Yeah, even Ibram Kendi knows that. Everyone knows that. Ask any African what they think of African Americans, and you'll get a very, very clear answer on that. And vice versa for that matter. But anyway, so, what do we have here? We have this basic, we have virtue signaling that is being codified with bond issues, millions of dollars in architecture, right? We value education. So what do? We throw money at new buildings, right? This reminds me of a scene from The Office. So The Office is great. The West Wing, The Office is great for different reasons. The Office by Aaron Sorkin, I don't agree with his politics at all. I think that he's naive when it comes to his beliefs on conservatives and liberals and his dismissal of libertarians. But it's good because you kind of get these very eloquent expositions of what that version of the American moderate left thinks. And, I don't disagree with Sorkin on anything. He has some really good stuff in there sometimes. But he has a line, Rob Lowe says a line where he reveals his true politics to somebody who he has been basically catfishing. He's been arguing with this conservative woman. He's been arguing with I believe the chief of staff's daughter, who's a public school teacher, and he's arguing the devil's advocate argument for the right wing, so-called anti-education. And at the end he comes out and goes, no, I'm really for education. And he leads, teachers should be paid so much and teachers are great. And then he said, public schools should be palaces. And that's what my town did. They built a palace. They built a palace to education. But it's a palace that has no function and no ability to increase education in any sense. And to the extent that it burdens the community with taxes and with higher land taxes and higher prices, and the fact that it has reallocated so many resources, so many acres, and taken so many people's time away from doing basically anything else that would be educational. So that would be anything else. If they had jobs, that would be more educational. If they went to the charter school, that would be more educational. If they were homeschooled, that would be more educational. If they just sat around and did nothing, that would be more educational. But instead, no, they have to go and listen to these teachers. And again, the content, even if you don't want to critique the content, even if you don't want to say, well, this pedagogy makes no sense, these methods make no sense, or this class is a class that shouldn't matter, there's so many ways you could look at it. You could look and say, I don't think that trigonometry is a valuable class for, kids in high school to learn. Trigonometry in and of itself is valuable in the context where it's used, but that doesn't mean everyone should have to take it, right? And this is true for pretty much every subject. Some of the more basic stuff, you might have more agreement there, but even then it's questionable. But then even if you want to admit, well, this is a good topic, let's say, reading is a good topic. It's good for people to be literate. Okay. Do they do a good job of that, though? Is the way that they teach literacy in the public schools effective? And the answer is it's probably certainly not the most effective or even close to that. But leaving that aside, let's assume that they're doing a good job. Are they doing a better job because they're in a new building versus an old building? Right? We all had to read Romeo and Juliet. It's stupid. I mean, there's nothing wrong with Shakespeare or that play. It's just in the curriculum that we have to read it. Okay? If we read it in a building that was built in 1999 versus a building that was built in 1964, assuming we don't have frostbite and are dying of exposure, which wasn't the case in even the building built in 1920, what difference is it? I mean, if anything, the ambiance of an older building would evoke the ethos of Shakespeare more than a new building. That's such a trivial, inconsequential thing. And if you want to say, well, it inspires awe, it inspires respect for education, translated how? It just shows that there was a big waste of money. All that architecture is lost on the population. Yeah, so this, what does this have to get an affirmative action debate? Okay, come on, guys. It's like you're not even listening to what I'm saying. This is why I don't make a living off YouTube. So, yeah, it was a huge waste of money. I feel personally invested in the sense that I was once believed in that, and I was in the groundbreaking. So I'm allowed to say this, by the way. I was in the groundbreaking fucking ceremony. So I knew all the talking points and was able to ape them back, which is, that is what the true point of public schools is, right? To learn how to ape back, to repeat back what you're taught. It's not about critical thinking. You can't even be taught critical thinking. The only hope you ever have of developing critical thinking is to be faced with some kind of adversity where you have to figure shit out yourself, which is not what you do at public school, at least if they're working properly. If they fall apart and you become personally motivated in such a way, maybe you can find a way to make it happen. But if that's the case, you didn't need the public school for that to do that. In fact, if anything, they probably got in the way of your development as far as that goes. And Yeah, anyone being objective knows he's a great thinker. He's absolutely a great thinker, and you have to be a contrarian, contrite idiot if you don't believe that, or think he's just there because he's black. Like, that's absolutely, he probably gets some additional fame because he's black, some, but that doesn't mean he's a nothing burger. What an asinine thing to say. All he needs to educate are books and a chalkboard. Yeah, imagine what you could do with $26 million. And, you got $26 million or $13 million for the second bond issue. So $39 million total. And you say, we got to educate, the high school had 800 and so kids. So let's say 900 kids. Let's say 1,000 kids just to round up. What can you buy for that? You can buy a huge library. You can buy private lessons for everyone. You can buy awesome fitness advice, like good lifting, good mobility, yoga, weight training. By the way, that stuff isn't academic, but since that can help you for the rest of your life, I actually think that's some of the best returns you can get. Not to rip on the sports. And the thing is, a lot of the stuff you do in sports, sometimes it's good cardio. A lot of times it's not great on long term, like strength. That's all stuff that makes sense. That makes perfect sense, right? If you can develop good habits because you know how to weightlift and shit, and to do mobility, that's probably better than you going to health class or shop or anything like that. But you could pay for private lessons. You could set up a fund. And this all, this is actually interesting too. Big dumb fat cat. Which Thomas Sowell books have you read? In your next comment, list the ones that you've read. Not that you read the title. List the Thomas Sowell books that you have read cover to cover. But not to ruin my dialogue because I'm talking to people in the comments, but, so in my town, there was a kid in my class whose little brother was 5 and he died of meningitis. It was a tragedy. It was a horrible, horrible tragedy. But this little brother loved hockey. His older brother played hockey, and he played hockey, and he loved hockey. And so his parents, a few years later, set up a fund to raise money to teach young people how to play hockey, to pay for them to have ice time, to pay for them to have training. And they set it up so that they take donations and they expend money, but they always grow the fund. So every year it gets a little bit bigger. So the first year, they were awarding individual scholarships to a couple people. And the second year, a couple more people. And the next year, a couple more people. And now, 15 years on, or actually more than that now, maybe 20 years on, they have enough money that they are giving free instruction in an ice skating and hockey to everybody who wants it under the age, I think, of 7 in that town. Everyone. So they're giving free lessons for ice skating and hockey for every child under the age of 7. This is completely private. The ice arena is private. The instructors are private. The fund is private. And they did not have $26 million. They didn't have $13 million. They didn't have $1 million. They didn't have $100,000. But they have slowly grown that. And now there is a perpetual education institution in that town that's teaching, dozens and dozens, maybe in the long run, hundreds of kids how to skate. Now, maybe that's not that important, but you could duplicate that for everything, for music, for piano, for instruments, for every sport, for weightlifting. All of that would be possible. And it would be much easier when people didn't say, well, why would I support that when I'm paying $1,200 a year in taxes for the goddamn new high school? Yeah. Sean Palmer, it's a fact that if you start the kids later, if they get to sleep more, it is better for their education to sleep more. It is 100% better for your education to get a good night's sleep than it is to get up early. Read the book on sleep. He talks all about that. It's much better that the kids sleep. As not my mentor, but the guy who got me into politics, really, John Mogopoulos, would say, it's better to just sit at home smoking pot than it is to go to school. But yeah, so a huge, huge waste of money. And of course, the fact that they tried to build a stadium and failed, right? They spent however much they spent on that, and I don't know how much. It had to have been hundreds of thousands of dollars at the least, and failed. Nobody was accountable to that. Nobody got fired. Nobody got excoriated in the press. Nobody was shunned. Nobody was, hey, you're in fact, the superintendent in charge at that time, and I don't know if building the trying to build a stadium was his plan or not. He retired, and then he came on as a consultant for the school board for 1 year for $250,000. Basically, they sold the one football field they had and gave all the money to the superintendent to, quote, advise the school board. So people wondered where the money went. Well, that's where some of it went. So a complete scam, complete no accountability. And there is no accountability too, right? Let's say the test scores go down. It's not the teacher's fault. Just ask the teachers union. It's completely not their fault. They have no control. They'll tell you straight up, they have no control over test scores. They have no control over, the results. It's not something they can control. So, but we're supposed to venerate them and say we owe them everything, and they're the linchpins of our society, and they're the heroes, and blah, 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 blah. And if my kids can't read, it's not my fault. It's your fault as a parent. And to be honest, like, they're kind of right. But if that's true, then what the fuck is the point of having them? Right? If they're correct, and I think that that's the one thing that they're definitely correct about, it's not something they can really control, right? When you have a student who does really well in school and who's uplifted and loves classes and picks up learning, that's a student who's going to do well no matter what. And he doesn't need 50-foot ceilings in a rotunda for that to happen. Okay. So or a new stadium for that matter. Right. So it's just virtue signaling, and they're taxing the hell. They're killing a town. They're helping strangle a little town. I mean, really, truly, they're helping strangle a little town. It's not the only thing wrong there. I'm not saying that's the one ill, but it's a giant millstone around everybody's neck, and it doesn't get you anything. At least with a millstone, you can grind grain and make something. Can't do that this way. So, all right, guys, we're coming up on an hour. I'll give it a couple minutes for questions, or if anyone wants to donate Bitcoin or Bitcoin Cash, let me know, and I'll flash the screen. Did everyone come? Let me check. Nos, man. Let me check. Oh my God, it worked. $1. YouTube is finally fucking paying off. Thank you, Nos, man. I see it. It is received. So yeah, if you guys want to donate crypto, just say, and I'll hold it up. That's the way we're going to do it from now on. So, any final questions? You guys aren't even talking about education. We're having the age of we got these. You race realists are so fucking boring. Okay, not that this isn't an interesting topic, because it can be an interesting topic. It certainly can, and not that it shouldn't be talked about. Sure, it's fine to talk about, but there's more to life. Why am I not here? Focus. Gotta hit. There we go. Perfect. Think Herv. Go ahead. Feel free to ask a question. Oh, did you send $1? Was that you, or was that Nosman? Who sent me the $1? That's Bitcoin Cash. That's Bitcoin. Herder, you are boring. Big dumb fat cat, you watch all of my streams. I haven't done a stream where you weren't in the stream the entire time watching. So you must be fucking pathetically nothing going on. Are you familiar with Ayn Rand and objectivism? Okay. It depends what you mean by familiar. Do I know who she is? Have I talked to a lot of objectivists? Have I read some of her stuff? Yes, to all those questions. I've known who she is for about 20 years now. Have I read all of her stuff? No. Am I an expert on her stuff? No. Oh, it worked. So that was you. You guys, I only got $1. So Herv, you didn't send $1 yet. Okay. I don't blame the state for everything, just the things that it deserves blame for. Right? It's not the state's problem that you're stupid, because the state doesn't teach the kind of stupid that you have. It was only one guy derailing the chat with non-educational talk. That's true. Do you enjoy YouTube channel Tick? I don't know who that is, so I have to say no. Have you seen Fringe Elements Anti-Statism at Lightspeed series? Not off the top of my head. Was that old? Maybe I watched a lot of his stuff over the years, but I can't recall all of it off the top of my head, so I can't say for sure. It's a good chance I've seen it, but if I did, I don't remember it. Yeah. I don't know what Tick is. Does Tick stand for something? Am I not cool enough? I don't know what that is. I mean, I've had videos taken down, Big Dumb Fat Cat, not you. Were you just never interested in reading more Ayn Rand? I started to read Atlas Shrugged and I couldn't get into it, which is a common problem with that book. Not to say there's lots of people who absolutely love Atlas Shrugged. It seems to be a hater, love it or hate it kind of deal. And I didn't read it enough to say I hate it. I just couldn't finish it. I think it's because I read about her debates with quote unquote libertarians and anarcho-capitalists, specifically Rothbard, and I definitely came down on their side of the debate. And I don't think when I read her debates about anarcho-capitalism, for instance, I didn't find them even remotely persuasive. Which is not to diminish her other writings. Just because she's wrong on one point doesn't mean she didn't have a point on other things. I would never dream of saying that, but I kind of felt like that I had read better writers when it came to politics than her. Tick is a YouTuber. Oh, I'll check him out. So C.S. Mirror sounds for Confederal Socialist, which was one of his terms. When I first watched him, he was called Studdles. And then he was Wisdom of the Acorn, Confederal Socialist, Alternative Hypothesis. He's had so many different names. Michael Malice says it's a huge mistake to start with Atlas Shrugged. Better to start with her other fiction books. Yeah, a lot of people like Fountainhead better. I've seen the movie Fountainhead, and I've read her book Philosophy Who Needs It, which is a good book. I wasn't fully sold on everything, but I thought it was good. I think it's it was rewarding. I just didn't adopt everything that she thought or said. And then you get into all the weird kinky. I mean, people think I'm weird and kinky sex wise. Like, damn. Like, I like one biographer said that she had a good wife, referring to her. What was his name? Frank. She was married and his name was Frank, and he was an architect. And then she was like, I found a younger man and you need to be okay with me fucking him. Mr. Nathaniel Brandon. The FBI is spending millions to hunt you down. That's hilarious. But you're up here posting on my live stream, even though the FBI is looking at you with hundreds of millions of dollars. Or millions. The FBI is spending millions of dollars to hunt you down, big fat dumb cat, but you're on my live stream. Okay. I totally buy that. I'm not skeptical of that claim at all. That's the soundest thing that you've said all night. And I didn't start with Atlas. I started with Philosophy Who Needs It. And I think I was in an objectivist study group in college, and we did Anthem, but I didn't read it. I would just talk about Mises the whole time. That's kind of how I played it. So, yeah, and the thing, the objectivism really does become kind of a cult of Rand, where everything Rand said is right, and you have to, even when she was made mistakes or contradicted herself, you have to find a way to square the circle. And I just don't, you know, there's a lot of really smart people who were objectivists who became post-objectivists. Some of my favorite people, YouTube-wise, or the stuff that they produce, are either objectivists or were objectivists at some point. So like, and I'm not one of those people who say she's stupid. I think she's brilliant. I think the fact that she was marginalized so much in society is astounding. I mean, you have all these people who want to have, female writers or whatever, and you have a woman who wrote the second most influential book in the United States for the 20th century. Right? So number one is the Bible, and number two is Atlas Shrugged. That's just, you can love it or hate it, but that's just the truth, right? And on top of all, and she launches the philosophical movement, whatever its merits or demerits. How many men can say that, right? This would be like, I mean, I wouldn't even compare her to Thomas Sowell, because her success transcends Sowell's by some many order of magnitudes, and yet to just and by the way, they both get ignored because they have either the wrong ideology, or they don't, well, both of them in that case, or they don't fit the narrative. So the fact that I very much disagree on saying objectivism is called, I didn't use those words exactly, but when they are her words, her writings are the final, say on what's true and what's not, I think that's going a little far. And they were doing, when she was still alive, they were litmus testing people and saying you had to agree with her, and if you didn't, you had to get kicked out. And they were expelling people who didn't. So like Rothbard's wife was a Protestant, and so they're like, you can't be an objectivist because atheism is true and your wife isn't an atheist. And so it was very much, I mean, you can see how much he influenced people like Stefan Molyneux, to be honest. So, and he would even acknowledge, I remember him saying, like, if I've seen far, it's only because I've stood on the shoulders of chain-smoking Russian giants. Yeah, so, all right, guys. Well, I want to thank you, everyone who donated, not Jim Jesus. Thank you very much. I think we're getting up to, what, $5 or $6 at this point? and Herv, and have I, Nossman? I guess it was Notzman. Let's see. Oh, somebody donated a penny. Awesome. Congratulations. I agree with Steph, or you're wrong. Yeah. And well, not only that, you're not just wrong, you're evil. You're going to kill everyone, if you don't agree with him. So, all right, guys. Well, I think that's going to be it for this stream. Thank everyone for watching. And only fools send their kids to public school.